Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of 52 Weeks with 52 amazing authors. And today I have with me Sameer Dossani, author of The Health Dialect: Why Modernity Makes Us Sick and How Ancestral Living Can Heal. Thank you for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Lisa.
So I have to tell you, and I shared this with you before we started recording, and I want to share this with our listening, viewing audience. I read this book sitting in the emergency room here in Chicago while I was there for about 8 hours for an asthma exacerbation. And I recently returned from Africa. And as I was turning from one page to the next, I just started having all of these revelations about, number one, what I'm putting in my body, how it's been processed before it got to me. And it just really made me realize that I have to be in the driver's seat in terms of how I perceive the next 50 years of life. My grandfather is 103 years old, and
Wow.
I can guarantee you that he does not eat a lot of the, fast food restaurants. As he's gotten older, he's been requesting things that he normally doesn't eat because he's like, it tastes better because he's losing his taste buds. But growing up, we always had vegetables for dinner, at least 3 vegetables every meal when I went over there. And so I know that part of his longevity, and he will kill me if I don't say this, number 1 is his belief in God, but number 2, what he's putting in his body, and also the fact that he's kind and giving to everyone. So tell us a little bit about your why for writing this book.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. I mean, so what happened in my story, so I actually started out in a completely different line of work. So I was a political activist. I was really involved in sort of human rights movements. I worked for Amnesty International. I worked for other international human rights organizations around the world. And at a certain point, I just wasn't particularly healthy. I wasn't doing well. I had an interest in food since I was a kid. I'd been vegan in my sort of university days. I was vegetarian after that. At this time I'm talking about, I was still a vegetarian. So I had an interest in food. I had an interest in health. But whatever I was doing was just making me sicker. And I also had one of my best friends, who's now since passed. He had a cancer diagnosis that happened around that time. So what happened was I got admission to a PhD program here in South Africa. And I went, instead of going to the university library I was meant to go to, I went to the medical library and I just started reading. So my degree was going to be, at that time, it was going to be something called Science and Technology Studies, right? So it means I'm sort of an expert in reading academic papers, understanding what's good and what's bad about them, criticizing a lot of papers on the go is sort of what I excel in. So I went to the medical library, I started reading about food and nutrition, and I got so angry, Dr. Lisa. I mean, I cannot tell you how angry I got, because everything that I thought I knew about nutrition was wrong, first of all. And it not only was it wrong, it would be bad. It's okay. If it's wrong, it's wrong. But there had been evidence showing that it was wrong like 100 years ago, right? So even basic things like weight loss, right? The most effective diet for weight loss, as was proven in the late 19th century by this guy called Banting. I don't mention this in the book, but these are some of the ideas that are in there. Banting was this huge, overweight English person, I believe he was in England. And no matter what he would do, he just couldn't lose weight. He tried what they try to tell you today, eat less and move more. Nothing worked. And finally, he was able to shift his weight on a diet of almost exclusively meat. And he lost, I'm not going to tell you the exact amount, but more than 100 pounds. And he lived the rest of his life at that weight. Now, if you talk with people who've lost a lot of weight, what tends to happen is they'll put it back on very, very quick. And there are reasons for that we can get into, some of which I go over in the book. But, just that knowledge that, what we've been told is, first of all, eat less, move more, really bad advice. Second, really bad advice, count calories, really bad advice. Third, bad advice, eat more plants and fruits and vegetables, terrible advice. This guy did exactly the opposite. So every single study I was reading was just like, okay, that's something I believe that's completely wrong. That's something I believe that was completely wrong. I ended up having to write this book just to explain, like, from a very sort of first principles point of view. In other words, by first principle, I mean, it's not really debatable. But by that, I mean, so what have humans been eating for a long time? What happens to food when it goes into the body? What is the hormonal response? Can we talk about insulin as a hormone that we all produce? And by the way, can we talk about high insulin levels as something that fuels inflammation? And that inflammation, that's something behind all the modern chronic diseases, right? Anything from your asthma, my asthma too. I was diagnosed as an asthmatic at the age of 14 or 15. Haven't had an asthma attack since I started eating the way I eat, right? Never once. And by the way, for the first few years that I was doing this, I didn't change anything else. I just changed the diet. Now I do lots of things. I go to the gym and stuff. I'm active and I do many other things. But in the beginning, it was just the diet that really helped me out. When I learned all that and I started applying it in my own life, first I was angry, and then I said, okay, I have to really write a book about it. And then I said, okay, I actually need to learn how to help people make these changes in their own life. So I became a registered health coach around the same time as I released this book. So now I help people. I specialize in people with chronic disease, and especially people who, I like to say, my clients are the ones who are really fed up with the medical system, and they've been jerked around. They've tried 3 or 4 practitioners and nothing really works for them. When they're sick and they think nothing's going to work, they think that this is just destiny. I'm going to be sick for the rest of my life. That's the patient I like to see. That's the client I like to see, because I can almost always help that person.
I love it. So I love the fact that you are a health coach, and there's a couple of things that you called out that actually personally affected me. So most of my adult life, I've struggled with weight, right? I've lost the weight by doing exactly what you said. Eat less, move more, high protein, low carbs. It's like you just up, down, up, down. And really that process can get very exhausting. It can get very discouraging. And I read an article recently that talked about by this, I can't remember the year, but by a certain year, the number of Americans, I know you're in Africa, and I will tell you in Africa, which I had the opportunity to visit, I didn't see a lot of obese citizens. And so I don't know if that has to do with lifestyle, what you're eating. But in the US here, they are predicting that I think it's half of the population will be obese by the next, 5 to 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah. Tell me, which countries did you visit in Africa?
So I went to, let me make sure I pronounce it right, Accra, Ghana.
Okay, Accra.
Accra, yes, Accra.
That was a beautiful city. Yeah, yeah. Did you get to see the beaches? Did you hang out on the beach?
We did. So there was 300 of us that went. So we got to see a lot of things. Definitely saw the beaches. We saw some slave caves, and just really got to be fully immersed in the culture. We went to an orphanage. So it was an experience that I will never forget. And it was life-changing.
For sure, for sure. No, fascinating stuff. So when we talk about Africa, of course, it's a big place. And I think here in South Africa, we do see obesity rates climbing a little bit, but not like it is in the States, not yet at least. West Africa, where you were, Ghana, is also very mixed. So I think, I think there is obesity rates are climbing, but from a very low starting point. So maybe, 10 years ago, it was like 1.6%. Now it's maybe 2.6%. So it's like a huge increase, but it's still not big enough that someone would notice it. So listen, what's happening in the US, it's really easy to explain all of this in terms of, we have sedentary lifestyles and we're eating more, we have more access to food. And some of that is true. But when we actually do the research, for example, there's a research paper that came out a little while ago, some fancy, PhDs from East Coast universities, they went to hang out with hunter-gatherers here actually they were in Tanzania, with like so-called the Hadza people, all right? These are a community of people who still hunt, they like to hunt baboons mostly, and they gather stuff, right? So what they did was they noticed, how much they were walking and how much how many steps. Like think about your Apple Watch or your Garmin or whatever. They were tracking how many steps these people were taking. And what they found was it was exactly the same as the so-called sedentary people in New York City or wherever. It was the same amount of steps. So whenever we ask these questions, that's not what's going on. What's going on is, and again, it's not hidden. We have these hyper-processed, hyper-palatable foods. You think about how many, I don't know if most of us have had the experience as kids. Most of us who grew up in the US. I grew up in Washington, D.C. Most of us who grew up in the States have an experience of like overeating junk food. Yeah. Like I can sit down with a pint of Ben & Jerry's and I can finish it. No questions asked. Even today, I could probably do that. I would have more trouble with like a whole bag of Oreos, but because they're so disgusting. But like when I was a kid, I could totally, finish a bag of Oreos, no issues, but no problem, right? You try and do that many calories. So what's that? A bag of Oreos just off the top of my head. This guy, so I actually know the answer to this because 12 Oreos is 100 calories, right? Let's say you ate 12, 24, 36, 48. 400 calories of Oreos, 48 cookies, I'm eating it, no problem. Having 400 calories of steak, 400 calories of eggs. 400 calories of eggs is about, 10 eggs? That's not easy to eat that in a sitting, right? And so if we just look at that, we just say, look, the problem is really simple. It's the commodified, it's the Coca-Cola, it's these really sugary snacks and so on. If you just, if you do nothing else in your life but get rid of that, you are definitely going to see some improvements. You're definitely going to see some, I don't think it's enough for many of us who are already sick, but you're definitely going to move in the right direction if you just get rid of the hyper-processed, hyper-palatable food. And in fact, this food, I don't even call it food anymore. I call it hyper-processed food-like substances. Because when we look at the process of making these things, there are actually people in a lab who are together with taste sensors. And you can go to some of these places and it's just remarkable. remarkable. They have different flavors. For example, I've seen a documentary where they show people tasting instant noodles, right? So this is what you call ramen in the States. I think it's a bit of a tragedy for the Japanese that you guys call it ramen in the States. That's what it is, right? So there's instant ramen noodles and different flavors. So it's the same. This was an Indian documentary. I think it was like chicken tikka, instant noodles. And they had 15 different varieties, and people had to vote on which, people were getting paid to vote on which was the tastiest. And you think about that process and magnify it by 1,000, because these folks have very big budgets, and they're doing, that's just one step of a multi-step process, which is designed to create something that you literally can't say no to. Remember those old Frito Lays or whatever shit commercials they were that you can't eat just one? Doritos, I think it was. Yeah, so
it's true, right? You open the bag and you're like, I'm just going to have a few, but then you just continue going.
And what I want to emphasize is that's not your fault. Like it is actually, all the propaganda is telling us that you just lack discipline. You should have just had one potato chip and moved on. That's not true. This is designed to hit those parts of your brain, the same parts of the brain that, for example, cocaine hits. So it's lighting up your brain in a way that you are designed. At the end of the day, we are just animals. We are animals that can be programmed like any other animal. And if you give us the right stimulus, you can get the right response. And in this case, the stimulus is the potato chip or whatever it is, and the response is to take more. And the companies know this. It's not hidden, right? I mean, if you read the trade magazines, that's what they're talking about. How can we make our products as addictive as possible? Because addictive products, you're going to buy more of them. So anyway, that's a bit of a tangent, but I think the point is, if you only had access to the kind of foods that the Hadza have, meaning meat and maybe some vegetables that you dig up off the ground and clean and wash yourself and eat kind of raw and spit it out. They spit out those potato-like things that they eat. They don't really cook them or anything. They just kind of chew them and spit it out. You're getting some of the sugar and not getting anything else. If you only did that, you wouldn't actually be able to overeat. Like it wouldn't be humanly possible. And also your metabolism would do certain things, your hormones would do certain things that would balance you out and make you very healthy in a very short period of time.
It's funny you mentioned that. When we were in Ghana, we were there for about 12 days. We could not find a bag of potato chips. We had plantain chips, a lot of those, but like a regular bag of potato chips that you see here in the US, I don't know if we were looking in the wrong place, but we were not able to find those things. And so I thought to myself, what if you took that mindset that you couldn't find them here and not eat them? What impact would that have on your life?
It's tough. I mean, I mean, you're in Chicago, which I know a little bit, but I don't know Chicago that well. I can tell you parts of New York, like I said, I used to work for Amnesty International and these big organizations, and I would sometimes be in charge of getting our delegations. So we would have like 12 or 15 people over to the United Nations. And of course, I'm not going to stay in Manhattan. I mean, it's just too expensive with the kind of budgets that NGOs have. So I would stay in Brooklyn or the Bronx. And some of the areas, I'm talking now 10 or 12 years ago, so maybe it's changed, but some of the areas, like I couldn't buy a vegetable. I couldn't buy fresh meat. It just wasn't possible. I could get all the Chinese food I want cooked in I don't know what kind of oil. I could get all the certain kinds of deli meats and sandwiches. You could get those in what they call the bodegas over there. I could get a cabbage. They would keep cabbages in the bodega because those don't go bad. But if I wanted to, had some friends coming over, I wanted to make some chicken or something, not a possibility. No way. So we have these food deserts in the US where it's impossible to actually get anything except those ultra-processed foods or some level of processed foods. Not all of them are ultra processed, but there's quite a lot of processing that's going on in all the foods I had access to over there. So, it's a tragedy that we built up a system where it's very, very difficult. And of course, even if you're not in that situation, even if you're not living in a food desert, how much easier is it, you had a long day at work, you got kids at home. How much easier is it to just, stop at a 7-Eleven or something and pick up something that seems reasonably hot and, okay, or to order Chinese or whatever it is on the phone. How much easier is it to do that than to, it's 6 o'clock, I've been working since 8 in the morning. I gotta take the pans out. I gotta get some fresh meat. I gotta put seasonings on it. Like, it's not easy, right? So I'm not saying any of this is easy, and I certainly don't want to blame anyone. But my message is, look, if you're not doing well, if you're thriving, more power to you. I keep doing you. I'm not gonna advise you. But if you're not thriving, then think about some ways whereby you could get those hyper processed foods, at least reduce them, if not eliminate them. And think about some ways. For example, I mentioned the person who comes home after work has kids, etc. What if you made a big batch of stuff on a Sunday or something? I'm not saying this works for everyone, but these kind of ideas can be very practical and can help people to actually make better decisions, to have better options. Or just even if you're sticking to the processed food, what's the least harmful processed food out there? I don't know what the answer is in any particular context. I personally like to go for things like beef jerky. I think that's you can get a beef jerky that just has salt. I think that's a pretty good option. Again, is this going to work for everyone? I don't know. I don't think so. But at least it works for some of us. And I think just asking the question, like if you ask the question, how can I eliminate ultra processed foods and eat in a more ancestrally appropriate way? If you're asking those two questions, I think you're on the right track.
I love it. So one of your chapters talks about the modern world wants you to fail. How will you succeed?
100%.
So why do you think the modern world wants us to fail?
Well, it's the same thing that I was just talking about in a sense, because let's use myself as an example. So when I was working, 9 to 5, and I had, I was doing the hustle, right? What would happen? I would go to the office, I would be a little hungry. My tummy would start to rumble around 9, 10 o'clock. I usually didn't eat breakfast. I'd go and I'd get a coffee and a croissant, right? Super easy, super junky food. Lunch would come around. I'd go and get a, bowl of rice or something. Dinner would come around, and maybe I'd have dinner at home with the family. But 2 of my 3 meals of the day were making money for the people around me, right? So nowadays, what do I do? So I was contributing a lot to the capitalist system, if you want to put it in those terms. I was just supporting the shops around me, and I was also, because I was sometimes eating less healthy stuff, so I'd have McDonald's for lunch or whatever. I wouldn't have McDonald's because I was vegetarian, but take the example of someone who was having McDonald's. They're supporting these national and multinational chains as well. So it's making a lot of people money at different points in the system. Now, what do? Well, I'm a big believer. One of the chapters in my book is about fasting. I don't fast as much as I used to when I wrote this book, but I still can fast if I want to. So if I'm out and I see that there aren't good options for breakfast, I just skip breakfast. Super easy. If I'm out and I see they're not good things for lunch, I'm going to skip lunch, right? And I'm going to eat dinner. So now I'm eating 1 meal a day. And I have, because I do my prep beforehand, my steaks is seasoned, ready to go. I just need to sear them on the pan for 5 minutes each side. Going to feed the kids. Everything's going to get done. No muss, no fuss. And who am I supporting? Yes, of course, I do have to buy the steaks from the store or whatever. I'm still supporting capitalism, but much less than when I was snacking. And the advice that they gave us in the 90s, was got to eat every 2 or 3 hours, right? So I'm not contributing as much as I was in those days. When I talk about the system wants you to fail, or modernity wants you to fail, it's like all the processes out there to encourage your bad habits. And I want to say, you don't have to be a slave to that. You don't have to live that way. If you want to, again, no judgment, because that's where all the pressure is coming, right? If I'm being pressured to do X and I do X, that's not all my fault, right? But if I'm being pressured to do X, it doesn't mean I have to do X. I can also choose to do Y. So that's my message in that chapter.
Something that you just said really just gave me a different perspective. There isn't a healthy option, so I can just fast. But I think our minds immediately go to just eat what is available. So I think about myself. I travel a lot for business. And so in the airport, what do you have? You have all of these options that are not as healthy. So what do I need to do? Fast, or bring something with me that I can have as that healthy option and not be forced to eat in the airport. It takes planning, it takes mindset. And I think a lot of us, because we don't, quote unquote, have a lot of time to schedule that part of our life, we just resort to whatever is available in front of us.
Yeah, no, I like you. I used to travel a lot. I now travel much less than I used to. But when I used to travel a lot, fasting is really useful in a couple of ways. So one way is that the body has a circadian clock. Circadian clocks regulate when we wake up and when we sleep. But actually, there's several circadian clocks. Like each organ has its own clock, if you want to think about it that way. And one of the most important, of course, is the stomach. So when you feed the stomach, this is especially useful if you're traveling outside the country. You're going to Europe, or you're going to Africa, or you're going to Asia. Now you're going to some place where the time zone is completely different. It could be 5, 6, 7 hours different. And what I will do generally is I will fast the day of a travel, and I will only eat. So let's say I arrive in Britain in the middle of the night at 2 a.m. It's happened to me many times. I may be kind of hungry, but I'm not going to eat, because if I eat at 2 a.m., I'm giving my body all the wrong signals. So I'm going to try and sleep at 2 a.m., maybe drink some water. I'm going to get up at a reasonable time and eat a breakfast along with everyone else there. I'm not going to wake up at 4 in the morning. I'm going to eat breakfast when other people are eating breakfast at 6, 7, 8, whatever they're eating, right? In that way, we can actually use this fasting routine. This works best if you're used to fasting in a low stress environment. So if you can do this at home, then it's much easier to also do it on the road. Makes sense? And it can be a super useful tool. Also, because when I travel, I really want to be very productive. I don't want to be in that sort of mindset of like, oh, I just had a big meal and I'm really tired. I don't want that. I want to be on sort of as much as possible until it's time for me to sleep and be off, right? So I find personally when I'm fasting, the level, and there's studies that back this up, the level of mental clarity is just off the charts. You're so clear, you're so focused, you can get that through whatever you need to get through. And then when it's time for you to relax and unwind, and maybe you have a meal, get to sleep or whatever it may be.
I'm going to try that approach. I'm going to try it for 20 weeks and see what the outcome is. I'll let you know how I feel, mental clarity. I like to read on the plane. And you're right. If you just had something to eat, what are you going to do? You're going to go to sleep.
Not necessarily a bad thing on the plane, but yeah, if you want to focus, it's not the right thing.
Yes. So I know that you mentioned that you're doing some health coaching. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I'm a health coach. I help people, as I say, through part of the problem, Dr. Lisa, is that 50% of us are obese, 80% of us are overweight and obese. The level, it's not just obesity, but this is one form in which the sickness takes. If you look at the people who actually have metabolic dysfunction, meaning that they don't process energy well. Depending on the study, it's as much as 88 or 90% of people in the US, right? So basically everyone has some level of sickness. And it depends where you are in this continuum. Like if you're in your 20s and 30s, maybe you just need to read my book and you can figure out a course of action on your own. Maybe you can check out some of my YouTube videos, or there are plenty of other people who are doing similar things. You can figure it out on your own. But many people, if you've been sick for a long time and or if you've developed a chronic disease, or if you've developed an autoimmune disease especially, then you might need a more individualized approach. So what I'm saying is that health coaching isn't necessarily for everyone, although I think everyone could benefit from a health coach. But I really help people who really need it. So one of my clients, for example, I don't think he's had a proper bowel movement. This is too much information. He's had diarrhea or constipation since like 2017. And we're working with him now. It's not easy with those serious gut issues. It's not easy to get him on the right track. It's taking, 2 or 3 months, and he's not feeling very well right now. But as we start to get him on the right track, that's amazing. That's what really gives me a sense of accomplishment, that, I've helped this person who hasn't been able to. And of course, in those years since 2017, he's seen every doctor. He happens to be in Australia. He's seen every doctor in Australia. He's seen every, digestive specialist, et cetera, et cetera. So, but, if we do these basic things, so try and find ancestral diets, try and find fasting, also try and deal with some other things that I haven't really gotten into here, like the emotion management, like the stress management, maybe exercise in some cases. We have to make these lifestyle changes because, there's usually if something goes wrong, there are many things that are going wrong. It's not just one thing. So we have to address these things in many ways and help people find the way to live that really optimizes their health and well-being. So one of my favorite stories is about a client who came to me back in the early days of my practice when COVID was still a big thing in the world. This poor person had pulmonary embolisms in both lungs. He had some issues, many different kinds of COVID issues. He was also going through a divorce at the time. He just wasn't doing well. After just a few weeks of working with me, he could walk again. He could sleep through the night for the first time in years without pain. He could walk. He moved to Hawaii to start a new career. Those are the kind of cases that I really, really love. I really love working with people who are frustrated and need to find solutions. I'm not a believer in silver bullets. Like, I don't think there's one thing that's going to work for anyone, or for everyone rather, but I am a believer in sort of the Sherlock Holmes method, where we're going to try different things, we're going to investigate different things, maybe we do some tests, and we're going to find out exactly what's wrong with you, even if you think no one has the answer.
Oh, that is awesome. I think back to this old statement that if you want to get a new outcome, you have to be willing to try something new and not try the things that you've always done. So I think that when you look at historically, everyone is the Jenny Craigs and the Weight Watchers and all of these things that are making money. My husband says this every day: capitalism is a real thing, and it's really bleeding us dry financially, because we try all these things for like 6 months, right? We lose the weight, and then 6 weeks later, we put it back on. We're right back at the beginning. So we haven't changed all those things the foundational things that we need to change to see a lifelong impact. And it's not just a one-time decision. It's something that you have to decide to do every day of the week. Just like when your feet hit the floor, you have to make the decision that you want to live and not die.
Yeah, and I guess my problem is, if we look at the Jenny Craigs and the Weight Watchers and so on, I think a lot of them, like, the methodology is wrong. You talk to some people, they say, yeah, I've been on Weight Watchers 4 times and I'm going to go on with again. And why are you going on it a fifth time if you did it 4 times and it didn't work, right? But that's our, so my point is like, if we approach this from a different lens, because all these people are rooted in a kind of like, we need to deprive ourselves. We need to deny ourselves the ice cream. We need to force ourselves to go to the gym. We need to basically, there's this idea of like Christian sort of punishment. Like, I think that's where it's inherited from. Like, you got to punish yourself for the stuff. That's not my message. My message is, if you eat the way we're designed to eat, a lot of animal foods with a lot of animal fat, your body's going to reward you in all kinds of ways. You're giving the body what it wants. You're going to have the best energy, the best sort of mental clarity. All of your depression is going to be a thing of the past. You're going to get to a place where it's just such a beautiful thing to be alive, and you're going to be able to do whatever it is you want to do, and your health will come. It's not going to happen overnight, but your health will come. You know, you'll be getting 10% better every month or every year, and it's going to be a great experience.
I love it. Well, listen, our time is almost up. I want you to tell our listening, viewing audience where they can get their own copy of the book.
So the best place is to just go to my website, which is my name, sameerdossani.net. It's also on Amazon and all the other places where you find books as well.
And then for those that are interested in your exploring your coaching services, they can also go to your website as well.
100%. They can book a free call right on the front page there.
Awesome. Well, if I ever decide to come back to Africa, I'll have to visit a different part of Africa. That's what I've been told. You can't just go to one part and that's the end. So it's definitely on my list after I go to some of the other continents. I finish my list. I don't think I'm going to Antarctica. I'm just thinking I'm good with the cold weather.
Oh, cool. Well, we're not too far away from Antarctica, I suppose. But yeah, we're here in Johannesburg in South Africa. It's a beautiful country. Check it out. Do come and visit us. We have lions and we have wine tours. So that's usually enough to bring both the young and the old.
Yes. Well, listen, everyone, this has been another episode of 52 amazing authors in 52 weeks. I was just speaking with Sameer Dossani, the author of The Health Dialect, Why Modernity Makes Us Sick and How Ancestral Living Can Heal. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise, and I pray that you can impact thousands and millions of lives with your story, your processes, your love for wanting to see us live.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lisa. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.